Imagine that someone in the middle of an argument starts shouting, insulting and provoking you in every way, but instead of losing your temper, you just smile calmly, not because you agree with the person, but because you don't let yourself be affected. You have controlled the inner peace that no one can take away from you. How many times have you given your peace to someone who didn't deserve it? A misplaced comment, a disrespectful attitude, an unexpected betrayal, and there you go, letting someone else control your emotions and destroy your day. But what if I told you that this is your choice? That in fact nothing and no one can take away your peace unless you allow it. What you are about to learn will change the way you see the world. It is not about ignoring or repressing your feelings, but about understanding a fundamental truth. The control over your emotions is in your hands. I will share with you 15 powerful lessons from historical philosophy that, if applied, will give you a level of mental control that few can achieve. Before we continue, I want to invite you to commit to your own transformation. Leave a comment with the phrase, "Today I choose to take control." By doing this, you will be marking the beginning of a powerful journey towards your best version. This is the first step to achieving the self-control and inner peace you deserve. Let's start with the true nature of offenses. Think of a time when someone did something that hurt you. Perhaps a cruel comment, a disrespectful attitude, or even an unexpected betrayal. Instead of feeling offended, you could simply ask yourself, why am I allowing this to affect my peace? The great lesson here that historians teach us is that insults have no power over us unless we accept them as such. What really bothers us is not the words or actions of others, but our interpretation of them. When someone insults you or does something to hurt you, the issue is not what the other person did, but how you choose to react to it. One of the greatest historians reminds us that nothing offends us except our opinion about it. In other words, it is our mind that interprets an action as offensive and not the action itself. No one can take away your peace unless you allow it. Imagine if, instead of getting angry, you simply saw the offense as something completely beyond your control. You could choose your reaction. If you decide not to feel offended, you end up leaving the other person without power over you. Now, let's reflect a little more on this. How many times have you let a word from a stranger, a mistake from a friend, or even a criticism from a boss deeply impact your state of mind? This happens because often the need for external validation makes us vulnerable to the actions of others. We want to be recognized and respected, but the reality is that no one has the power to validate or invalidate us except ourselves. Imagine that you become an impenetrable fortress. When someone tries to come in and knock you down with words, you simply observe, aware that it says nothing about who you are, but rather about the person who is speaking. The offenses cease to have an effect on you because you understand that your peace and happiness are built internally. They do not depend on what others think or say. True freedom, according to historians, lies in understanding that the offense does not reside in the actions of others, but in our response to them. When you take control of your own mind, you realize that offenses are just empty words with no effect on your inner balance. Now think about all the times you allowed something to get on your nerves. Each of these situations was a missed opportunity to apply historical wisdom and keep your peace intact. The key is simple. Don't let the offenses of others determine your emotional state. You have the power to choose how to react. When you make this conscious decision, your peace of mind will never be compromised again. After all, your peace comes from within, and no one can take it away from you unless you allow it. Self-control, your greatest power. Imagine that you are in a moment of great stress. Someone provokes you, something doesn't go as expected, or even the simple chaos of everyday life begins to wear you down. Anger, frustration, and fear. You let yourself be dominated by these emotions or choose a different path. The Stoics knew that true power is not in controlling what happens around us, but in controlling how we react to it. True freedom is not in doing what we want, but in not being slaves to our own impulses. Epictetus said, "Self-control is our greatest strength because it gives us the power to act wisely, even in the most difficult situations." It is not about ignoring or repressing our emotions, but about having the mental clarity necessary to make decisions based on reason and not on momentary impulses. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychologists in history, taught us that the first step to wisdom is to recognize and integrate our shadows. That is, true self-control does not come from denying our emotions, but from recognizing them, understanding their origin, and consciously deciding how to act in the face of them. The Stoics believed that in times of adversity, our true strength does not lie in reacting explosive, but in the choice to respond in a thoughtful, A balanced way Zeno of Citio, the founder of Stoicism, stated that the goal of life is not to be constantly happy, but to live according to reason. Reason allows us to see situations clearly without being swept away by emotional tides. Self-control does not mean being indifferent or apathetic, but rather having the ability to choose your response. It transforms the way we live because it puts us in command of our actions and thoughts. This makes us freer because when you have control over yourself, no one else can really affect you. Imagine a situation in which you feel anger growing inside you. Maybe someone offended you or an unexpected problem arose. Instead of giving in to the impulse, you take a step back, breathe, and reflect on the best way to react. This is not weakness, but a true demonstration of strength. You are acting with self-control, and with that you become immune to external chaos. This ability to choose the conscious and rational response to intense emotional situations is what makes self-control one of the most powerful virtues we can cultivate. When you learn to control your own thoughts and reactions, nothing can be more. Master yourself. Instead of being carried away by circumstances, you become able to shape them based on what you choose to feel and how you choose to act. So the next time emotional chaos arises, remember that you are solely responsible for your response. When you master your emotions, you achieve true freedom. 3. Expectation is the root of all disappointment. Imagine for a moment that you put all your trust in someone. You expect that person to act in a specific way, that they believe in your ideas, or that they reciprocate your kindness, but at some point that person fails. They disappoint you, betray you, or simply do not live up to your expectations. How do you feel in that moment? The great lesson here is clear. The higher your expectations of others, the greater the chance of suffering disappointments and frustrations. Zeno of Citio, the founder of Stoicism, warned us about this trap when he said, "The man who expects to find something good in others is doomed to suffer, because human nature is imperfect." If we expect others to behave according to our vision of how they should be, we are opening the door to frustration, because everyone has their own flaws, limitations, and decisions that we cannot control. This idea, which is reinforced by other important figures such as the philosopher and psychologist Ptolemy, he reminds us that the act of loving does not mean giving others the responsibility for our happiness. When we place our happiness and peace in the hands of another person, we put our own tranquility at risk. We are subject to the unpredictability of other people's behavior, which will never be fully aligned with our expectations. The philosopher Michel de Montaigne also reflected on this when he said, "Our main source of suffering is not what others do to us, but what we expect them to do." We often place the weight of our expectations on the actions of others, expecting them to fulfill a role that only belongs to us. When people do not meet these expectations, our peace is stolen and suffering arises. When we reduce our expectations of others, you begin to free yourself from this emotional trap. This does not mean that you should become indifferent or disinterested, but rather that you should accept that others have their own journeys, their own mistakes, and their own limitations. Instead of expecting the world to adjust to your expectations, you begin to adapt to reality as it is without becoming frustrated with what you cannot control. The practice here is simple but powerful. Make your inner peace a priority and understand that the behavior of others is beyond your control. When you free others from this burden of expectations, you begin to realize that you have the power to choose your reaction no matter what others do or fail to do. You keep your serenity intact. This is also exemplified by the famous story of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who throughout his meditations often reminded himself that as a leader, he could not control the actions of his subjects. He did not expect everyone to act according to his standards, but accepted that the world was beyond his control. He thus focused on keeping his own virtue and character intact, regardless of what was happening around him. By applying this lesson, you begin to see that it is not necessary to carry the weight of other people's failures. Everyone is on their own path. Your peace will only be possible if you do not allow other people's behavior to affect you. By lowering your expectations of others, you take an important step towards achieving a lighter, more serene life, more focused on what really matters, your own emotional balance. 4. Be indifferent to provocations. Imagine that in a moment of frustration, someone tries to provoke you. Perhaps it is a sarcastic comment, a merciless criticism, or an aggressive attitude. Your first reaction may be to want to respond in kind to show that you will not be disrespected. But what would happen if instead you remain completely indifferent to the provocation? The great lesson of the historians here is that true strength is not in retaliating or in letting yourself be carried away by provocations, but in maintaining inner peace regardless of the behavior of others. As Epictetus used to teach, it is not what happens to you that harms you, but how to react to what happens. Provocation only has power over you if you allow it to affect your emotions and thoughts. This reminds us of a crucial idea. You do not have to react to everything. When someone tries to belittle you, you can choose to simply not respond to provocation. This does not mean being passive or submissive, but rather choosing not to give energy to what does not deserve your attention. Indifference to provocations is a reflection of wisdom and self-control. The philosopher Albert Ellis, a psychotherapist who developed rational emotive behavioral therapy, said, "People do not offend us, we offend ourselves." The point here is that provocation in itself has no power over us unless we choose to interpret it as something that affects us. When you learn to be indifferent to provocations, you are actually taking control over your emotions instead of being reactive to external actions. Think about the times when you have let yourself be carried away by provocations. Maybe you have argued with someone. Maybe you have lost your temper with a cruel comment. These reactions, however natural they may be, only end up fueling the conflict and distancing you from your true peace of mind. When you practice indifference to provocations, you free yourself from this impulsive reaction and become stronger and more resilient in the context of your daily life. This means not caring about destructive criticism, the envy of others, or the mean comments when someone tries to provoke you. You can simply observe the situation as an outside observer without getting emotionally involved. This does not mean that you have to accept what was said, or rather that you choose not to allow provocation to define your emotional state. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, who was far from being a historian, also reflected on the value of indifference. He said, "The best way to deal with unbearable people is to simply ignore them. They are like a poison that only harms those who absorb it." He understood that often the best response to provocation is no response at all, simply because it is smarter and more effective not to react to something that does not deserve your energy. Practicing indifference to provocations is a skill that develops over time through awareness and reflection. Each time you manage to remain calm in the face of provocation, you strengthen your ability to remain at peace no matter what happens around you. Provocation loses its power when you refuse to react emotionally. In doing so, you become unshakable, able to live in harmony with whatever the world brings to you. So the next time someone tries to provoke you, remember that you do not have to react. You have the power to choose your response, and the choice not to react is often the wisest. In doing so, you become immune to those who seek to unbalance you and keep your peace intact. 5. Don't forget that every situation is a test. Imagine that in the middle of your day you are faced with a challenging situation, perhaps a conflict at work, a difficulty in your personal life, or even a moment of frustration in which things do not go as planned. React to these challenges. Do you see them as obstacles, as something to be avoided, or as an opportunity to test your own ability to remain calm and wise? For the Stoics, every situation in life is a test, an opportunity to exercise our virtues and improve our character. When something challenges us, instead of seeing it as a problem to be solved, we can choose to see it as an examination of our ability to be patient, courageous, and wise. The philosopher William James, often called the father of American psychology, said, "The greatest discovery of our generation is that human beings can change their lives by changing their attitudes." This site takes us to the central idea of Stoicism. Situations have no power over us, but our attitude toward them is what determines whether we emerge stronger or weaker. Every time we are faced with a difficulty, the Stoic mind invites us to reflect on how I can use this situation to test my own wisdom and self-control. It is not about avoiding difficulties or reacting impulsively, but about facing the challenge with a calm mind as an opportunity for learning and growth. The philosopher Immanuel Kant also reflected on this idea, saying, "What we call difficulties and obstacles nothing more than opportunities disguised as tests." When you are faced with a situation that seems difficult or unfair, you can see it as a chance to move closer to virtue and not as mere adversity. Every situation, whether big or small, is a chance to demonstrate integrity, courage, and self-control. When you begin to see life as a series of tests, you stop feeling helpless in the face of challenges instead of rebelling or becoming paralyzed by frustration. You face the situation with a mindset focused on solutions and learning. This transforms even the most negative experiences into sources of growth. For example, if someone treats you badly, you can see it as a test of your patience and your ability to be indifferent to provocation. If you face a mistake at work, you can see it as an opportunity to improve your skills and learn from the situation. Each moment then becomes a chance to overcome yourself, to test and strengthen your character. In his letters, Seneca reminds us that it is not what happens, but how you deal with what happens that defines the course of your life. This teaching inspires us to realize that every situation, whether good or bad, brings with it a lesson that we can learn as long as we are willing to embrace the challenge with an open mind and a positive attitude. So the next time you find yourself facing a difficulty, remember that it is not an obstacle to be overcome, but a test to be faced. Every situation offers an opportunity for you to get to know yourself better, to develop your virtues, and to demonstrate the strength of your character. By facing life in this way, you transform life's tests into springboards for personal growth. Letting go is not losing. Imagine that you invest a huge amount of time, energy, and emotion in something or someone, perhaps a project, a relationship, or even an expectation that you have for the future. But suddenly the situation changes unexpectedly. Something goes wrong or things do not happen as you expected. How do you feel about this? Sad, frustrated, anxious, or perhaps even lost? For the Stoics, emotional detachment is an essential skill for maintaining inner peace and serenity in the face of life's unpredictability. Instead of clinging to results or expectations, the Stoics teach us to emotionally detach ourselves from external things, understanding that true happiness does not depend on what happens around us, but on how we deal with it. With these situations internally, the philosopher David Hume, although not a historian, shares an idea that resonates with historical teachings, stating, "Happiness depends more on our attitude towards things than on the things themselves." When we cling to a result or a person, we are placing our peace in the hands of something we cannot control. Life, as we know, is uncertain and things are constantly changing. Whether it is a love that fades away, a project that doesn't work out, or even an unexpected loss. The concept of emotional detachment, according to historians, does not mean being insensitive or indifferent, but rather not letting yourself be dominated by the emotions that arise when things do not go as planned. As Epictetus said, we are not disturbed by things, but rather by the opinions we have about things. When we stop placing our happiness in something external, we gain the freedom to live with greater lightness and tranquility, regardless of the circumstances. By mastering detachment, you become more resistant to change and loss because you understand that what really matters is how you deal with the situation and not what the situation brings you. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche also warns us about the ephemeral nature of life and relationships. All that is necessary for happiness is to learn to be strong enough not to be enslaved by what is impermanent. By letting go of things and people, you strengthen your emotional autonomy and prevent external fluctuations from stealing your inner peace. Think about what happens when you cling to something that is beyond your control. The natural tendency is to create expectations. And when these expectations are not met comes frustration. Emotional detachment is precisely this exercise of liberation from expectations where you learn to value experiences and people, but without expecting them to define who you are or determine your emotional state. A practical example of this can be the relationship with work. Imagine that you invest a lot of time and energy in a project, placing all your hopes in its success. If the project fails, emotional detachment allows you to accept failure with serenity, without it deeply affecting your self-esteem or happiness. You learn from experience, adjust your approach, and move on without carrying the emotional weight of failure. Detachment is also fundamental in our personal relationships. When we learn not to depend emotionally on others for our happiness, we become more authentic and balanced. This does not mean that we should be indifferent to people, but rather not place our peace in their hands. This creates healthier relationships based on mutual respect and understanding instead of emotional dependence. By mastering the art of emotional detachment, you become free to accept the impermanence of things, to live in the present, and to understand that we do not need to control everything to be happy. True peace comes from within, and the ability to let go of what we cannot control is one of the greatest sources of this peace. 7. Visualize the problem and how small it is. Now imagine a problem that is occupying your mind, something that seems huge, urgent, perhaps even overwhelming. It could be a debt, a recent argument, a mistake you made, or a situation that simply seems out of control. Now close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself observing this same situation from the top of a mountain after an airplane. Now imagine yourself looking at your life from space. The problem still seems so big. Historians practiced a mental exercise known as the bird's eye view. a way of emotionally distancing themselves from events to see them in perspective. Marco Aurelio, emperor and philosopher, wrote to himself, "Look down from the sky and contemplate the vastness of time and space. Everything that happens is like a leaf in the wind." This is not a way of denying the problem, or rather of perceiving its true proportion within the whole. The philosopher Blaise Pascal, reflecting on the human condition, said, "Man is just a reed, the most fragile in nature, but he is a thinking reed." In other words, we are small compared to the immensity of the universe, but we have the power to give meaning or to remove the weight of the things we experience. Visualizing the insignificance of the problem is a powerful antidote against anxiety and despair. When you realize that the problem that torments you today will not even be remembered in 5 years, or even in C, you free yourself from the emotional intensity that it carries. Now you gain internal space to breathe, reflect, and act with more clarity. Imagine a storm inside a glass. When you are inside it, everything seems cloudy, confusing, and desperate. But when you step back, you realize that it is just water stirred in a container too small to contain your emotional universe. Most of the problems we face are only this big until we change our perspective. Cognitive scientist Lisa Feldman Barrett states that the human brain builds meanings based on context and focus. That is, what you focus on grows. When you focus too much on the problem, it becomes gigantic. But when you insert it into a larger context, that of life, of time, of the universe, it becomes small, sometimes even irrelevant. This type of visualization is not an escape, it is practical wisdom. It is remembering that everything passes. Pain, frustration, discomfort, everything is temporary. When you look with the eyes of reason and philosophy, you see that most of the things that seem big today will not make the slightest difference tomorrow. So the next time a problem seems unbearable, mentally distance yourself from it. Look from above. See the whole. You are not what is happening to you. You are the consciousness that observes. And the bigger your vision, the less weight the thing that distresses you. Remember, the universe is vast. Time is infinite. And your problem is just a point in the middle of all this. Calm is power. Think of a situation in which everyone around you is losing their minds, screaming, reacting impulsively, making rash decisions. Now imagine yourself in the center of this chaos, maintaining posture, breathing deeply, talking to clarity, and looking into the eyes of those who try to destabilize you. This is not weakness, this is dominance, this is power. For the Stoics, calm is not just a virtue, it is a silent weapon. It reveals a trained mind that does not allow itself to be carried away by impulses, that does not hand over its emotional state to anyone while others consume themselves in emotional reactions. The calm individual governs himself and therefore governs the situation. The Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu, author of The Art of War, once said, "If your enemy is angry, provoke him. If he is calm, respect him, because it will be more difficult to defeat him." Even in battles, the most feared were not the most explosive, but the most serene. Because no one knows what to expect from someone who remains impassive in the face of conflict. Calmness reveals preparation. It shows that you have already thought, reflected, and trained your spirit for difficult situations. As neuroscientist Judith Willis emphasizes, a calm brain makes smarter decisions, while a brain in a state of alarm activates defense mechanisms, not wisdom. In other words, staying calm is maintaining access to your most rational, most strategic, and wisest part. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and historical philosopher, wrote to himself, "If someone offends you, ask yourself, what bothers me is his action or my judgment about it?" This constant self-investigation is what gives us back control and puts us in a state of active serenity, not a passive calm, but a calm that chooses not to react violently precisely because it knows it can. Calmness is also contagious in tense environments. The presence of a serene person can completely change the mood. This silent energy transmits security, balance, and authority. People trust more in those who do not lose control. Those who speak little and act with precision, but cultivating this calm requires practice. Start with small things. Don't respond when angry. Don't take everything personally. Take a step back before acting. These are the small internal breaks that train you to one day be unshakable where many would crumble. So remember, the next time you want to react impulsively, choose silence, breathing, and a firm gaze. True superiority is not in dominating others, but in dominating yourself, and in this, calm will always be your greatest demonstration of strength. Anger screams. Calm commands. 9. Don't react with anger. Play with your mind. Someone provokes you. They try to get you mad. They spread lies. They question your worth. They sabotage your ideas. What do? You explode. You react with fury. Or do you smile internally? Take a deep breath and realize, this is just another phase of my mental training for the Stoics. Anger is always a choice, an emotional response that only appears when you lose sight of what is under your control. But the true historian transforms every offense, every provocation, every setback into a practice field. He doesn't play the emotional game of others. He plays his own. This idea is echoed in the thought of Viktor Frankl, psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, who said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In this space is our power to choose our response. And in this response lies our growth and our freedom. When you perceive this space, you realize that anger is not inevitable, it is optional, and in this choice, power is born. Imagine that each difficult person, each unfair situation, is a challenge of a phase of your own inner game. As in games, the more difficult the opponent, the more you need to use strategy. OT emotion, the more provocation, the more you test your stability. Anger wants you to react, while self-control wants you to win. The Stoic philosopher Musonio Rufo said that the best revenge against a provocateur is not to become like him or her. That is, if someone treats you with disrespect, the most powerful response is to keep your dignity intact. This does not mean accepting injustices. It means dealing with them without losing what is most valuable: your clarity, your focus, and your calm. Mastering this mental game is to stop being surprised by people's behavior. As Claire Spector said, people are what they are. The problem is the expectation we create. When you understand that the world is chaotic and people are imperfect, anger loses its surprise effect. And when something doesn't surprise you, it doesn't dominate you. Transform anger into a strategy. Instead of reacting, observe. Instead of attacking, be silent. Instead of justifying yourself, walk firmly. This is historical emotional intelligence. Don't give the other the power to control you. With a provocation, you don't need to fight back. You need to win from within, and victory is not humiliating the other. It is leaving the situation bigger than you entered, with your peace intact and your mind sharp. Remember, whoever gets on your nerves dominates you. Whoever you ignore disappears. So the next time anger comes knocking on the door, don't invite it, and use the moment as part of your training. Because in this mental game, calm is your sword, and anger is only useful for those who haven't learned how to play yet. 10. Be aware of the brevity of life. Imagine for a moment that everything you have, your house, your possessions, your relationships, your youth, even your own breath, can disappear at any moment. This may be scary, but for the Stoics, this awareness is not a reason to despair. On the contrary, it is the key to living with more presence, gratitude, and wisdom. Life, as the Stoics always reminded, is brief, fragile, and unpredictable. Marcus Aurelius wrote daily about death, not with morbidity, but as a reminder that nothing is guaranteed, not even tomorrow, not even the next hour. He said, you could die right now. Let that guide your actions, your words, your thoughts. This philosophy, known as memento mori, remember death, is not surviving with fear, it is surviving with intensity. What is before you now? When you understand that everything passes, you stop wasting energy on trivialities, resentments, and worries that do not matter. In the great flow of time, the Roman poet Horace said, woe or seize the day, and this advice remains current. It means, do not postpone your life. Do not live as if time were infinite, because it is not what today seems. Eternal of pain and attachment and achievement. Tomorrow will be just memory dust. History, everything flows, everything changes, everything ends. Neuroscientist Mary Frances O'Connor, specialist in grief, states that the awareness of imminent loss is what gives more depth to love, and the Stoics knew this. You accept that everything is transitory. You begin to value more, not less. You hug your children with more tenderness. Look at the sky with more attention. Live with more presence, because you know that this will not last forever. Transience is also a balm for pain. If everything passes, the pain will also pass. The moments of sadness, of crisis, of loss, none of them are eternal. As the philosopher Heraclitus wrote long before Stoicism, no man steps into the same river twice, because the river is no longer the same, and it also does not change everything, including you. Being aware of the transience of life makes you calmer, wiser, and freer. You stop resisting time and start flowing with it. You understand that the only thing you really have is the present moment, and that it is not worth wasting it with anger, haste, or distraction. So remember, everything you love will change everything you fear. To this is not a tragedy, it is the nature of life. And by accepting it with an open heart, you truly begin to live with purpose. Do not wait for time to pass to realize the value of now, Be awake, be grateful, be present, because nothing is yours, nothing is fixed. And exactly for this reason, everything is precious. 11. See the pain behind the offense. When someone attacks you, provokes you, or treats you with disrespect, the automatic reaction is usually anger, the impulse to defend yourself, to counterattack, to show that you do not accept being treated that way. But what if you took a step back, and if instead of reacting with fury, you looked at that person and asked silently, what is this wounded soul trying to hide? History has taught us that we should not take anything personally, because almost everything people do is a reflection of them and not of us. Marcus Aurelius wrote, when someone harms you, it is because they act in ignorance of what is good. In other words, those who hurt you are most often acting out of pain, ignorance, or imbalance. This idea resonates with the vision of the Vietnamese monk Nhat Hanh, who said, when someone speaks or acts in anger, it is because they are suffering, and suffering wants to be understood. Compassion in this sense is not passivity. It is clarity. It is looking at the other person not as an enemy, but as someone who may have never learned to deal with their own pain. Anger in itself is a natural response, but what you do with it is what defines your inner strength. Transforming it into compassion does not mean accepting abuse or injustice. It means not allowing the behavior of others to corrupt your peace and character. It is a form of profound self-protection. You choose not to carry the weight of bitterness that was not born in you. Psychologist Marshall Rosenberg, creator of nonviolent communication, said that behind every aggressive action there is a need to unmet. When you develop this vision, you begin to see others with more understanding and yourself with more lightness. Anger dissolves when you realize that most human behavior comes from the confusion of pain and fear. Now imagine the strength of someone who, even when attacked, remains firm, lucid, and generous, who does not respond with hatred, but with silence and compassion. This person is not being weak, they are above conflict. They know that feeding the cycle of anger only perpetuates suffering, and that interrupting this cycle requires courage and maturity. Transforming anger into compassion is a gesture of deep emotional intelligence. It is saying, I see your pain, but it will not become mine. It is protecting your peace without having to win arguments or humiliate anyone, because in the end, as an old Buddhist proverb says, holding on to anger is like holding hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone. You are the one who gets burned first. So the next time someone tries to hurt you, remember you have a choice. You can feed the fire, or you can put out the flame with the water of compassion, and in that choice lies the true power of a stoic spirit. 12. Cultivate gratitude as a shield for the soul. Think about how many times if you find yourself complaining about the traffic at the head of the body of life, that is not yet as it should be. Now stop for a moment and look around you. Breathe. You are alive. You are reading this. You have eyes that see, a mind that thinks, a heart that feels this on its own. It is extraordinary for historians. Gratitude is not just a beautiful feeling. It is a philosophical practice, a tool to strengthen the soul. It is a daily exercise of recognizing that despite everything that is missing, there is much more that is already present, and that by realizing what we already have, we drastically reduce the power of dissatisfaction, envy, and sadness. Musonius Rufus, Epictetus' master, taught that those who do not learn to be happy with what they already have will be eternally slaves to what they still desire. The Stoic understands that by valuing the now, they do not become passive, they simply stop being ungrateful, because ingratitude is a silent poison that prevents us from seeing the wealth hidden in the ordinary. Modern science, in turn, has confirmed what the ancients already knew. The psychologist Robert Emmons, one of the greatest scholars of gratitude, showed in his research that people who cultivate the habit of giving thanks daily have higher levels of happiness, better sleep, fewer symptoms of depression, and more resilience in the face of adversity. Gratitude is therefore a form of resistance. It is saying thank you even in the midst of pain, even when everything is not perfect, even when there are reasons to complain. It is seeing what remains, what still works, what is still beautiful even in the ruins. When you begin to develop gratitude, you begin to reprogram your mind to focus on what is right and not just what is wrong. You realize that what today seems ordinary, like a glass of clean water, a sincere conversation, or a simple sunrise, is actually a silent miracle happening before your eyes. The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote, "Nothing is more honorable than a heart that recognizes the value of what it has." This recognition is a choice, a habit, a practice, and the more you practice, the more your mind moves away from lack and approaches peace. Gratitude is not denying problems. It is having the courage to see the light, even when there are shadows. It is a type of wisdom that frees us from the illusion that we need more to be happy, when in fact, true abundance begins when we learn to see the richness of the now. So today, do not expect great miracles. Look to what already exists and silently say, thank you, because when you are grateful, you are not only recognizing the value of life, you are honoring yourself as a true historian. 13. Find freedom in acceptance. Imagine for a moment that everything around you is beyond your control, the actions of others, the circumstances that you cannot change, even the way the world is organized. Now imagine that instead of fighting against it, you simply accept these conditions without resistance. How would that make you feel? For the Stoics, acceptance is not passivity, but rather a form of wisdom that frees us. Many times we spend an enormous amount of energy trying to control the uncontrollable by resisting what is inevitable, but true strength, according to the Stoics, lies in recognizing that some things are beyond our reach, and by accepting them we free ourselves from unnecessary suffering. Epictetus, one of the greatest masters of Stoicism, taught that we cannot control events, but we can control our reaction to them. This idea is central to historical philosophy. Accepting what we cannot change gives us an inner peace that nothing can shake. When we force ourselves to control everything, we become prisoners of our own will, but when we accept what we cannot change, we become truly free. This acceptance does not mean conformity. It does not mean that we should accept injustice, suffering, or adversity without trying to improve or seek solutions. But while we are fighting for something better, we can accept the present as it is without it wearing us down emotionally. The philosopher Alan Watts, who, although he was not a historian, spoke about a similar idea. He said, life is like water, flows naturally. When we try to follow it against the current, we suffer. When we accept it as it is, life becomes a fluid and light dance. This vision reminds us that constant resistance to reality is the root of suffering. Accepting life as it is with its imperfections and unforeseen events allows us to live in harmony with it. Acceptance also allows us to free the mind from a constant cycle of frustration and anxiety. Instead of wasting energy trying to change what we cannot control, we can use it to focus on what really matters: our actions, our reactions, and what we can do within our own limits. Now think about the situations that afflict you. Maybe you have a difficult relationship with someone, a job that does not satisfy you, or a circumstance in life that seems to be beyond your control. True freedom lies in learning to accept these things while still working to change them if possible. But most importantly, you learn to live without them defining your state of mind. Spirit acceptance does not mean giving up. On the contrary, it frees your mind to act with more clarity and efficiency. It teaches us to choose our battles, to discern what really deserves our energy, and to let go of what we cannot change. In this way, instead of carrying the weight of things we cannot control, we free ourselves to be who we truly are, free from the chains of emotional resistance. Therefore, remember, accepting is not resigning. It is having the wisdom to understand that there are things beyond our reach. When you make this a daily practice, you will find a deep peace, a peace that does not depend on external circumstances, but on your ability to live in harmony with what is. This is true freedom. 14. Develop resilience in the face of adversity. Imagine for a moment that you are going through a difficult situation, an unexpected loss, a crisis at work, an illness, or a challenge that seems insurmountable. Most of us, when facing these moments, feel fragile, helpless, even tempted to give up. But what if, instead of letting yourself be consumed by despair, you could rise up stronger? And if, instead of succumbing to pain, you use this moment of adversity to grow? Historians believe that true strength is revealed in easy times, but in the way we respond to difficulties. For them, resilience is not just about resisting pain, but about using it as a tool for internal strengthening. Epictetus, one of the greatest historical masters, said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." This means that even in the face of suffering and chaos, the way we choose to react can be the decisive factor for our peace and personal growth. This ability to resist, to persist even when things seem to be against us, is what defines a resilient person. It is not about denying pain or difficulty, but about facing them head-on with the confidence that, like all things in life, they too shall pass. Psychologist Stephen Southwick, who has studied human resilience in depth, says that resilient people are not those who never fail, but those who, even in the face of failure, keep trying. This is the fundamental principle of Stoicism. It does not matter how many times you fall, but how many times you get up. True victory lies in always getting back up with courage, wisdom, and humility. learning from falls and growing stronger with each challenge. Resilience does not come from a lack of difficulties, but from a lack of difficulties, the ability to transform them into learning and growth experiences. When we face adversities with a historical mindset, we do not see them as obstacles, but as opportunities to become stronger, wiser, more prepared for what lies ahead. For example, imagine a situation in which you fail in an important project. The automatic response would be frustration, discouragement, fear of failing again, but instead of giving in to these feelings, a resilient mindset would adopt the historical vision of seeing each failure as a valuable lesson. What can I learn from this becomes the central question. How can I use this experience to become more skilled, more prepared, more balanced? Each mistake becomes a springboard for future success. In addition, resilience is also about maintaining serenity in situations of pressure. The philosopher taught that it is not the burden that brings you down, but the way you carry it. This means that when facing difficulties, it is essential to keep your mind clear and focused. Instead of getting lost in the immediate suffering, we can learn to deal with adversity with calm and emotional control, seeing it as a part of the journey, not as the end of it. Historical resilience is fueled by the idea that everything that happens, it is an opportunity to exercise our virtue and wisdom, and it is through this vision that we are able to not only survive, but grow in difficult times. So remember, adversity is not an enemy, but a teacher who teaches, challenges, and strengthens. When you choose to face life with resilience, you become unbreakable, able to weather any storm, knowing that the sun will always shine again. True strength lies in continuing to learn and evolve regardless of the obstacles that arise. 15. Find peace in simplicity. Imagine that you wake up in the morning and the first thing you see is a world full of choices, commitments, expectations, and noise. There is always something to do, something to resolve, something to acquire. The day begins, and the mind is already 1,000, trapped in the endless demands of modern life. But what if instead you could simply stop and appreciate what is simple? The historians believed that true peace lies in simplicity, in distancing ourselves from the incessant search for more and learning to value what we already have. Zeno of Scythia, the founder of Stoicism, said that happiness is not in possession but in use. And in saying this, he invited us to reflect on how often we get lost in the search for external things when inner peace could be found in what is simplest and most essential. Simplicity in the historical view does not mean living in a monastic way or depriving yourself of the good things in life. It means finding joy in the little things, in the quiet moments, in the stillness of the mind, and in genuine relationships. We live in a world that constantly pushes us to consume in order to seek the next goal, to earn more, to do more. But at some point we have to choose the peace and tranquility that simplicity offers. The philosopher Henry David Thoreau wrote, "Life is simple, but we insist on complicating it. We are masters at creating complexity by surrounding ourselves with things and tasks that ultimately do not bring true satisfaction." True happiness, according to historians, is not in excess, but in balance and simplicity. Less is more is not just an aesthetic concept, but a philosophy of life. Have you ever noticed how the greatest joys in life are in the simplest things? A hot coffee in the morning, a walk in the open air, a deep conversation with a friend. It is not the great achievements that touch us the most, but the small moments of peace, those that arise when we stop chasing more and more and start to value what really matters. Seneca in his letters taught us that it is not possessions that bring us happiness, but rather the ability to be content with little. When you let go of the constant search for material and external things, you approach a state of serenity that no material good can offer. True wealth lies in the ability to be happy with what you already have. This type of simplicity also applies to our thoughts. Often the mind is overloaded, full of worries and expectations. But by seeking mental simplicity, you can train your mind to focus on the essentials, to seek clarity in the midst of confusion. As Epictetus said, freedom begins when you decide to no longer be a slave to your own distractions. So imagine a day where you deliberately choose simplicity. You wake up, do what is necessary, value each moment, allow yourself to rest. You do not get lost in complicated thoughts or in the rush of the modern world. You allow yourself to enjoy the simple pleasure of being alive, of being present. When you find peace in simplicity, you begin to realize that you do not need much to be happy. You do not need a perfect day, a life without difficulties or grand achievements to feel satisfaction. Peace is in each step, in each breath, in the acceptance of what is, and in gratitude for what you already have. So if you want to find true peace, start simplifying your life, simplify your thoughts, your goals, your relationships, and your expectations. Free yourself from the unnecessary weight. You Carry, and in doing so, you will discover that peace was already there, all along waiting for you to see it in its simplest form. I sincerely hope this message has been helpful. I want to sincerely congratulate you for having come this far and having completed the video. This means that you want to improve as a person. If you like the video, leave your comment. If you don't know what to comment gratitude, so I will know that you watched until the end. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, what are you waiting for? Subscribe now and join us. Stoicism is full of teachings like this that are applicable to our daily lives. So I encourage you to continue learning about this philosophy. Here I leave to videos full of historical wisdom so that you can continue learning. Until next time.